Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 944th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe, Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Sarah McEneaney and Amanda Millet-Sorsa. We're thrilled to welcome poet Rachel James here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter, and that here in New York, we're on Lenapehoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for necessary decolonial work, but serve as a reminder of place of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustain and enrich the stolen land we're speaking from. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's guest and host. Born in Munich, Philadelphia-based artist Sarah McEneaney received a certificate of painting from the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts and studied at Philadelphia College of Arts. Her autobiographical subject matter renders people, places, and things with vibrant, meticulous, and detailed brushwork characteristic of the acrylic medium in which she often paints. Sarah's paintings are an invitation into the story of a life lived. McEneaney's work is in numerous collections, and she's had regular solo gallery exhibitions in New York and Philadelphia. And our host today, Amanda Millet-Sorsa, is an artist, an arts writer, and an arts worker based in New York. She's exhibited at Below Grand, the unoppressive, non-imperialist bargain bookstore, and elsewhere. She holds an MFA from the New York Studio School and a BA from Brandeis University, and has been in residence at multiple international organizations. She's a member of the International Association of Art Critics, a curator at Below Grand on the Lower East Side, and we are very lucky to have her as a contributor to the Rail. And with that, I will pass it over to Amanda.
Thank you, Chloe. And thank you for the Brooklyn Rail team to invite me back to these lunchtime talks, which we also enjoy. And we're lucky to be in conversation today with Sarah and her work. Sarah has currently a show at Tibor Denage Gallery downtown in New York. And it's a unique show in the sense that we get a glimpse into Sarah's process of working on painting with works on paper and some small panel paintings from a residency that she did in Ireland. So I'm looking forward to kind of understanding a bit more how these works on paper relate to the paintings that Sarah is currently working on and will be showing at a show later this year, next year in Philadelphia. So thank you, Sarah, for joining us. Chloe, maybe we could begin with the slideshow and get a sense of Sarah's work together. So here we have some of Sarah's paintings from recent years, where we can see that there is this special attention to the artist in the studio and autobiography specific to Sarah's life. And if we click through some of these first few images, Chloe, we can get a better sense of the variety of these different angles in the life in the studio of the artist, of Sarah the artist. And so, Sarah, I wanted to ask you, your work is highly autobiographical, where we can see snippets of your life in the interior of your home, in the interior of your studio, where your pets appear in different places. When did this autobiographical content become the main subject of your work?
Well, I like to think that it actually started in a way when I was still in art school. Like giving the example of, a painting studio with a model, rather than just painting the model, I would find myself painting the entire room and the other students and the model and myself painting. So in some ways it kind of started very early, but as I finished school and was, doing my own work in my own studio, it became more and more realized I was telling the story of my life as it was unfolding. Also, because I've been in the same space for 44 years and I've worked on the space. So that has happened, and I've chronicled that as well, sort of all through my history of living and working in the same building for 44 years.
Wow, that's incredible. That's such That's such a rare thing to have as a constant in your life. And so, aside from this building or this studio that's been changing over the years, what does autobiography mean to you?
I guess it's I think you used the term, a life lived sort of, and another term I like is composing a life, because while I'm describing and I'm like showing myself age and change, it's not strictly factual. There's a lot of things that are made up or embellished or completely fantasized. So, and things taken out and other things put in. So I don't tell everything. It's not a tell-all, but it's sort of describing a life. And I like to think that people can come to them and bring their own stories
Mm-hmm.
to the work.
And if we go, Chloe, if you go back to some of the paintings in the slideshow, Sarah, so in this kind of dialogue between something that you see and observe in your life of the life lived and perhaps items that are more imagined, what are you responding to in your life that you are choosing to include in these works?
Well, for instance, in the one just after this one, Chloe, if you want to go one ahead. So this one, I'm putting gesso on panels, but I have the computer set up as if it's there with me and I'm watching the January 6 hearings, but I wasn't doing that while I was making those portraits of the January 6 committee members and testifiers. But I put myself in that situation with another studio task of what I'm doing.
So you're putting together these fictional narratives that could be real, of
Exactly.
perhaps other real moments in your life together.
Right.
And so, why are you choosing to do that?
I don't know. I mean, because I am, at heart, I am a creative person. So I don't want to I'm not a journalist, I'm not going to just tell you facts. I'm making creative work and I'm playing with different times and different things coming in, even the collage elements and something like this. The view you see through the doorway, that's lifted from an earlier painting from maybe 10 years ago of that room.
Mm-hmm.
And so I took a different time period and plunked that in there.
Right. So since you brought up the collage elements, I just wanted to point the audience's attention to the computer on the paint can in this painting, and also perhaps the self-portrait on the back wall. And as you mentioned, the entryway through the door. And if we go back to a previous painting, Chloe, we can see, sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
Go ahead. Well, this one is actually, everything in there is painted. There's no collage in that one.
Right. Okay. But we get a sense of the kind of detail that you include, like these portraits of your cats on the wall.
Right.
And if we go to the previous painting, Chloe, here we can also see a lot of details of maybe images on the wall pinned, just kind of getting a sense of what this artist's life could be and the things that are surrounding the studio.
Right.
And now if we move forward, Chloe, to that first kind of self-portrait, which brings us to the Thibordonnage exhibition at the moment, we have these works on paper that you've been working on, Sarah, in the studio, kind of accumulating perhaps moments or ideas. And so could you let us in a bit more in what you mean by the collage when you mentioned that earlier and how it relates to these works on paper?
Sure. So the collage thing actually started, I think it's the second image that shows the studio wall and has a whole lot of small little things. I did a series of altercations to newspaper images of Trump, all during his campaign and his 4 years of disservice. And I put them on Instagram, and I wanted to include them somehow in the studio, but I didn't want to repaint these ugly images. So I landed on the idea of just printing out on rice paper, tiny images, sort of contact sheet size images of those images. And that's how I put them into the studio. And that got me started because I'd always been repainting paintings into new paintings, that thinking, well, I've already made this painting. I have a nice image of it in my computer. I can print it out. I can change the size to fit into the painting that's being made. And so I started recollaging my own work back into my new paintings. And then I landed on the idea, well, like this figure, which is, about 10 inches tall, I painted it, and then I took a snapshot of it and I shrunk it down, and it appears in a studio painting, but where the figure is much smaller, maybe only about 5 inches tall. So I'm able to paint it a little bigger, get a little more detail, and then shrink it down and retain my hand when it gets collaged into the painting.
Right.
And yeah, like this cat appears in some, those ones I showed, there's quite a few of these elements that are in the show at Tibor that are in some of those earlier paintings. So they just like, there's sort of like a stockpile of images and references and objects that I can use in the paintings.
Right. Yeah, that's such a great kind of trajectory from your work, your work just kind of entering this detail and fun, and connecting with some singular object like your cat, or your paint can or your computer, and then bringing it into the painting in a kind of shrunken scale form.
And in fact, sorry, the background in this one is brick and floor detail from another painting. So here I collaged the background from a painting into one of the works on paper.
Okay.
And then the cat is painted. Yeah.
Right. So there's this constant kind of referencing of the self and self-referencing, the cycle of looking inwards, looking outwards, where, there's kind of like this infinite back and forth of looking outwards and looking inwards. How do you place yourself in that? It feels a bit like an out-of-body experience.
Yeah, I guess it is a little bit, but it's the kind of thing, sometimes something will just happen. There'll be some momentary time and where I'm doing something and I'll think, oh, that's a painting, or that's a gesture in a painting, and that might lead to a painting. And living in the space that I'm working in, I'm constantly looking at it and looking at it from different angles.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, I like that whole in and out.
Right. And so speaking of the architecture of the space that you've occupied for 4 decades and more, how do you see that? How has the space changed over time, and how has that been evident in your work?
Well, the space has changed a lot, because when I first bought the building, it was a wreck. Mm-hmm. And one of my early day jobs was I started working with the carpenters I hired to work on the place. And then in the process, became a carpenter and was able to do small jobs on my own. And that was one of my day jobs for a long time. So I physically did a lot of the work in the place myself. So I know intimately, and when I'm sort of framing the studio, I know like what a 4x8 sheet of drywall is and how that relates to the space. And so I can sort of map things out. And like bricks, I'll like count the bricks, how many courses of bricks go up to the ceiling. And I'll use that to sort of figure out the scale of the room, like by using what I call sort of my dumb math, I'll figure out. So it's like, then it's, you do a renovation and then 30 years later, you need to do it again, or you need to do parts of it again. So this view, this is of my sort of living area looking out into the yard. This was a sketch for what became a more detailed painting, but, I changed the windows and the doors at some point. So all that stuff is like kind of very present in my mind and in my pocket book. And it's just part of the whole story.
Yeah, and I really like how you're referencing that as a life lived, because it really gives us a kind of, even though some of these might be fictional moments, it does give us references as to the evolution of your life. a memory can be so fleeting sometimes, and different images can trigger different memories from
Right.
certain periods.
Right.
And but what I like especially about that other work, Chloe, if you could go back just one moment to the interior with the computer, is that there's this incredibly fast line work, when we're looking through these windows. It becomes almost an abstract painting on its own, as different from the architecture, the interior within.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit more about the speed of how you're working with these, perhaps compared to the painting, or how you're relating to time as you're looking at these interiors?
Yeah, well, I do make drawings. They often they don't have color in them, and this is sort of unusual in that way. But I rarely or if have never shown these kind of images. There's always drawings that sort of lead up to the paintings or are part of the painting. But I generally don't show them. They end up really messy in the studio from kicking around while I'm painting. So it's sort of unusual to see something this sort of fast and sketchy for me. But I like it, and it's definitely relates to the painting that came from it. And to me it's very evocative of the space, even though it's much rougher and not as detailed.
Right, right. And in the following works, we can see more portraits of your friends, your animals that you live with, that we can see are appearing a lot in your work.
Yeah.
In having this intense relationship with the life of the artist in the interior, we of course are remembered. We can recall Matisse's Red Studio, or even Courbet's allegory of the studio, where we can see works finished on the walls and works in progress, or metaphors of different things of the creative life, the entourage, or even Philip Guston, who would focus on just objects in his surrounding, like a bit full of brushes. It's kind of the different alphabet that makes up the interior exterior life of the artist.
Right.
And so what have you learned in kind of studying yourself, or putting yourself in these fictional moments of what the artist does?
What have I learned? I don't know. I mean, I like the fact that even though I sort of have this steady course of what I'm after and what I'm describing and chronicling, I like that I've made that shift to the found the collage element as a way to sort of further tell the story or make it more detailed, as well as having like sort of rougher things, the works on paper. Yeah, I don't know. That's a hard question.
Okay. And so in going back to this collage where there is the presence of your hand in detail, and we get that kind of consistency in the painting by having privy to these moments that are then scaled down. What can you say about wanting to keep your hands in the work? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, I want it to be seamless, the way the collage fits in, relatively seamless. And like this one, the sewing machine is in one of the paintings I showed, and it gets shrunken down, but it it gets that tight detail. But I can't paint it as tiny, or maybe I'd drive myself crazy trying to do so, as how it comes out when I shrink it down and print it out, but I still can see my hand. And I don't know, there's something kind of fun and magical about that, that still my hand, but it's much smaller.
Yeah, no, I agree. These are very charming kind of, closing in on, like, what is this cat doing? They're dreaming. I wish, I kind of wish I was, asleep like this cat was. There's this kind of bucolic peace in some of these. And so this kind of brings me to perhaps talking more about the portraits that you painted about when you were watching the January 6th trial. If we could see some of those, Chloe, we can go back to the cats and dogs in a bit. But these are all kind of portraits of the different characters that were presented during the January 6th trial. And all of us having heard bits and snippets of what was said during this trial, I feel like sound enters this work in a way that perhaps in the other works, I feel more of that bucolic peace, a kind of silence, with the cat sleeping.
Right, right.
And so could you tell us a little bit more about perhaps what brought you to this body of work, which seems to contrast from the piece of the other ones.
Right. Well, I've always been very politically engaged and involved in, I'm involved in a lot of local community work in Philadelphia, around different things. But I really wanted to watch those hearings, but I knew it was going to be hours and hours of testimony. But then I thought, well, I'll make portraits of them, and that way I'm working and not just staring at my computer and getting, furious or whatever reaction I might have had. So and because people weren't, some testified for longer, but the camera doesn't linger on a face. I tried to do them pretty quickly, but I wanted to get, the sort of the feeling of the person. So again, that was something a little different for me. I don't paint that many other people besides myself. Painting other people and using a video image is something, I don't do. When I do self-portraits, I look in the mirror or I just make myself up. Now, this one was a little different. I actually took the two portraits of Cassie Hutchinson and Liz Cheney and collaged them into this painting of the computer sitting on top of the Kills primer can, which then this whole thing then got collaged into that painting that we saw at the beginning. So the collage thing was going on. But I enjoyed making those portraits, and I'm just really happy I listened to that testimony. It was fucking amazing. It's like, and different from when I was doing the awful Trump drawings. It's like that I was like making images of ugliness and awfulness, and sometimes I found a little humor in them. But these are like just portraits of people who are standing up and doing the right thing, doing what they should do, just giving their testimony for that horrible day.
And so you said that you are engaged in political work, but does your painting have a political, kind of direction to it? Or is this a new thing in your?
Well, I think that it makes little inroads, just because there might be details of things that I'm involved in that would come into the paintings. One thing I've been involved in, I'm one of the co-founders of Philadelphia's Rail Park, which is like our version of the High Line. And we have our first section open, and there's still more to do. And we now have staff, a fabulous executive director and staff, but I'm still involved as a board member. But I made paintings of that site, and I still make them, of the finished part of the park or unfinished parts of it. So it's fed in that way, sort of like when it's sort of directly,
right.
It's near me. I walk there all the time.
Right. And then once again, it's part of your life lived.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so I like how you mentioned that you don't usually paint other people. It's usually images of yourself, either a self-portrait or imagined version. So what was it about this collection of people who are outside yourself that you chose to kind of bring into your world?
Well, I guess I felt because it was so important, the testimony they were giving and the committee, putting together this opportunity and putting it on television for everybody to see, then I'm sort of doing my part of testifying by documenting it, kind of.
Right. And so do you use so these are mostly from, I guess, live video?
Right.
Are you using live video in other places, or photographs or memory? What's kind of like your toolbox of looking for observation? How do you decide what needs what attention?
Yeah. I guess I sort of gave myself a rule for these I just did it from the live testimony, which, I could have say frozen a frame and then just painted the portraits that way, but I gave myself that like that I was just painting them while they were testifying. So that gave myself a little bit of a challenge there. In terms of what I use for my paintings in general, I use observation, I use memory, I use imagination, and I'll use photographs if I need. If I'm trying to draw something that I don't have in front of me and I can't make it up, and I will go online and like look up an image. I feel like I'll use whatever I need to get the image I want.
Right. So maybe, Chloe, could we see some of those animals, portraits of animals, so we can get a sense of some of the differences?
Most of the animals are from observation, because they do hang around, but if I don't, but I could even like start one and then they move and then I take another piece of paper and then I come back to it when they get back in that position again, that kind of thing. But it's also, I've been drawing and painting cats and dogs so much, I can kind of do it out of my head too.
Mm-hmm. Right. And especially these ones that you see all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And so are there artists that you think about that have also kind of touched upon this autobiographical content that you're kind of bringing into the studio or admiring of? Who are you thinking about in dialogue?
Well, actually, just now when I was talking about, drawing and painting the cats and the dog all the time, I thought about David Hockney. Did you ever see those ones he made of his dachshunds?
Yeah.
Oh my God, they are so great. And he would say in that, he would just leave paper all over the house, and wherever they were, he would just start drawing them and painting them, So I have always liked David Hockney's work in terms of the narrative and, his world. He definitely paints his world. And
yeah, I can see that.
It's a good example.
And so do you go around chasing your cats looking for a good moment to draw them?
Well, no, they kind of follow me around. You know how animals are. They just want to be with you, and
Right. Right. And so in this body of work, I found very endearing because this is kind of the beginning image of that series on the wall where you went to Ireland for an artist residency, right?
Uh-huh.
And the entire collection of these small paintings really give us an insight into this place which was a little bit of a haven for, I guess, a few weeks. And we can really see that green of Ireland that everyone keeps talking about, but also this kind of peace. But again, these quiet moments of what it means to be an artist and to be inside or outside and thinking and waiting. And we can really feel like we're there with you. So could you give us a little bit more insights as to what this experience was like for you?
Sure. Well, I love doing residencies, and what I like about them is taking myself out of my comfort zone, out of home, and into a new environment, and then responding and reacting to it. And I end up making paintings about the experience of being there. So like that first one with the suitcase, and this is walking up to my studio is the sort of the middle door, like right above my head. And that's the back of the same studio building. So, I was there for a month. I had a bedroom in the big house, and then I had a studio in the converted barn. And you're there with other artists. There were more writers than visual artists, and mostly artists from Ireland. But I just love that experience of, you go in and it's an empty studio. And so one of the first things I usually do is make a painting of the empty studio. And then as the paintings progress, I make paintings of like what I see as I'm walking to the studio every day, or some walk I'm taking, or I make a painting of myself in my bedroom, sleeping in the bedroom. It's kind of, it comes down to what I experience while I'm there. There's one where I'm swimming in the very cold lake, and it's just washing my clothes in the studio sink, and that one. So it's very much about the experience of being there, and again, sort of like seeing myself, looking in, looking out from within.
Mm-hmm. That constant cycle of
right.
Inside, outside.
Right.
Yeah. And so at what point do you insert yourself in your paintings?
Yeah, that's a good point. See, I think of them, even when I'm not in these, I think of them as self-portraits.
Mm-hmm.
There's a little rabbit, a little Irish hare on sort of on the right-hand triangle there. And this one has covered, I paint the landscape exactly how I want it. And then it's got a veil of raindrops over it. Kind of like that fabulous Van Gogh painting that's in the Philadelphia Museum of Art. I don't know if everybody knows it, but it's fabulous.
Yeah.
And so there's a couple there with rain in them, because it does rain quite a bit, although it would never rain all day there. It would kind of rain and the sun would come out, rainbow. It's an amazing place. There's another rain one.
Yeah, no, these are great. I love the little marks of the rain. That also goes so well with the kind of the plants, the flowers that are there. They're a little purple.
Yeah.
By the lake.
Yeah.
And there's just so much detail in your work. So I can understand how you'd want to retain those in larger formats and then keep them as you compose the bigger paintings.
Yeah.
So which brings me again to a question of, you know, what is the detail that you're drawn to? You know, how do you bring these details together to create these narratives?
Yeah, you know, I'll look and I'll often think, like in this one, I knew, like I had met that dog on an earlier visit, but I knew I wanted to put him in the lake. So then, you know, when I made the lake painting, you know, the dog came back. So I took a couple snapshots of that dog, but then I had to make it up, putting him in the water. You know, I often will like try to frame a scene. I'll think what I want to include, and, you know, on the right, and how far do I need to go to the left to tell whatever moment or story I'm trying to tell. Like the tires are significant in this, and the little lifesaver orange thing. So it's, you know, it's a compositional story. It's a story of what's happening. And there's me swimming with the dog watching, and my towel and my glasses on the
right. So in this moment, you've chosen to insert yourself in the painting and the dog.
Yeah.
So you guys are having a conversation.
Yes. And because like I didn't swim at first when I got there. For a while, apparently there was some problem with the water and we were warned not to swim. But then when we got the go ahead to swim, and the water was really cold, but it was so bracing, and just to get in and swim and then get out and take a super hot shower. But I like to swim, and I always liked water and water paintings. You know, in the past, I've made a lot of bathtub paintings and shower paintings. So water fits in there. Yeah, and there's the empty studio, me sitting at the far end.
Right, it's the empty studio, but there's also a nice dialogue with all these red columns and your shirt and the door.
And the red columns
are
really
these imagined? Sorry?
That?
Are these imagined, these kind of red?
No, actually the red columns were there. This is a former barn, and they had like these little rings. I think they were like places where they would tie up horses, and there were probably stalls separating some of those sections, but it was an old stone barn. Beautiful space. But the doors were red and the columns were red, and I love red. So I put in, of course, I put the fire extinguisher in, which, you know, I might leave that out, but I put it in because of the red. Yeah.
So this is when you're starting to think, well, what else could I add in there that adds to this visual play?
Yeah. Or just also, it's like, this is the studio at the beginning. You know, there's no work on the walls yet. I've not made a painting like that, but I have in the past at other residencies made paintings of the paintings in progress on the walls, kind of like the studio paintings at home.
Right. Yeah. And so when you're making these studio paintings on the walls, you're painting your own work, but sometimes you're also painting other people's work.
Yes.
Which is kind of a fun game. Or how do you understand that approach to interpreting someone else's work in your work?
Yeah, that's tricky. And that's why I'm determined to paint it with my hand rather than, say, use a photograph and collage it in. And I have a lot of work I've collected from friends making trades. And then I often, when I have a new piece, I'll paint it in, and as a way of sort of like, look at this new thing I'm going to live with and look at, as a way to sort of getting to know it again in a way, if that makes sense. That one painting at the very beginning that was all paint, no collage, that had a whole lot of other people's work in it.
Okay, maybe we can go back to it a bit later and see that again.
It's just a bedroom in Ireland. And so on the rug, I put the map of Ireland, which of course that wasn't on the rug.
Right. And then we have a view here of your sketchbook drawing or remembering missing your cats, perhaps.
Well, no, I'm drawing the cat that's the little cat that lived there. And she's right outside the window. One morning she woke up meowing outside the window.
Right. I see that. Yeah. And so also another thing I wanted to speak a bit more about, but this one actually, I really love the detail of the fire escape plan on the wall.
Yeah.
This one I thought was really great. So is this an instance where you're painting directly the details, or you've kind of scaled it down from a bigger observational work?
I've scaled it down a little bit, like there's a big chair, between the bed and the desk, and so I simplified it. But I thought that little floor plan was really important, as well as I wanted to have my computer and my phone charging away, during the night while I'm reading.
Right. Yeah. And and so what I wanted to ask you is, I think for a long time you were painting in egg tempera, making work, and I was wondering here, there's been a switch to acrylic in recent years, and if you could speak a little bit more about that transition and how that may have changed some things in your work.
Sure. So, well, in art school I painted in oil, but I tried acrylic in the early 80s, but I found it to be like too plasticky at that time. And so then for a while I made gouache paintings, just gouache on paper, but I wanted to work bigger. So I landed on egg tempera at some point, and I did that for many years. But then as the work got even bigger, like my biggest egg temperas were about 3x4, but now my work is often like 4x4 and 4x6. So it was just too untenable to have the egg tempera. It's, it can be a little temperamental. So I thought, let me try the the acrylic again. And I still use the powdered pigments that I use to make egg tempera paint, and I just mix it with matte medium and in different levels, to get different translucency. So I'm able to get what I want with the acrylic. I think the mediums have probably improved since the 80s. So since, I think it's been almost 10 years now. For a while I did both egg tempera and acrylic, but now I haven't done any egg tempera for quite some time, and I'm very happy with the acrylic.
Right. Yeah. These colors are really gorgeous, and we're definitely getting a lot of different translucencies, especially in this dark blue of the sky in Ireland. We can really feel that glistening of the stars that we perhaps don't get to see so often in the city.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you're painting really all times of day and night. Are these from walks that you take in the evening? Are they, from images?
Well, the days were very long in Ireland. It's quite far north. So the sun, and I was there for the solstice, which was amazing. And, the sun didn't go down till like 11 o'clock or something. And I'm a real kind of day worker. I like to get up really early. So I'd get up early when it, because it'd be light at like 4:30 or something. But I just made myself, I woke up during the night and said, well, I got to go out and look at the night sky, because, there isn't that much of it. So I just a couple times got myself out, in the middle of the night, because I woke up and I went out and looked at the night sky. I do love night skies, but in Ireland in the summer, the night sky is pretty short.
Right. It's a special moment, I guess, especially in the summer.
And there's my laundry hanging, blowing in the breeze.
Yeah, that's nice. So you really were kind of remote from any kind of machines.
Well, the washing machine there was broken when I got there, and it might have gotten fixed, but I just got used to washing my clothes in the studio.
Okay.
That seemed to work.
And this is were people getting vegetables in the vegetable garden? Was this
in that one greenhouse there were strawberries, but I guess this place used to have a big vegetable garden that fed everybody, but it's not so much anymore. It's a little, I guess they don't have the staff to run it. It was very rural, very beautiful area.
Yeah. Yeah, we're really getting, the full picture of what it's like to be there. It's really, really a nice insight. Which I wanted to ask you, do you look at film? How are you, do you have film as a kind of inspiration? Because there is really kind of like a nice sequence and narrative to these that feel very cinematic.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's I like hearing that. I definitely watch films and and video. I love stories, so whether I'm reading stories or watching films, I love stories. So I like that observation.
Mm. But also just the sense of movement from having these
Uh-huh.
together tell a kind of story.
Yeah.
And not even kind of like, not even a passing of time, because I think time is more about perhaps what's going on in your studio with this changing space. Um, but just the time passing as an experience lived
Right.
at this specific residency.
Yeah.
So could you speak a little bit more about how, when you change locations, that might affect the kind of work that you might be making, like in this instance?
Well, I would say things like color are definitely affected. And there's always that sort of moment of like where I sort of have to spend a little time looking around to decide what's gonna be important enough to paint about.
Mm.
What's telling the story of this experience, um this cat, she wasn't allowed in the house where we live, but she was allowed to come in the studio, so she'd come in the studio and get up in that chair. So I mean, it's almost like a throne for that cat. And I spent a lot of time painting that chair, that beat up red wicker chair, but and then when I was working quite small, 9 by 12 and 12 by 12, all these paintings are. So I had to kind of shift myself to think smaller in a way for the Ireland work.
Mm-hmm. And this is nice. We see the entire collection of the works on paper, from the portraits of your animals to
Right.
the sewing machine, and get a sense of what the scale is relative to the much larger painting that may or may not include these.
Right. Yeah. These are all small too, sort of 8 by 10 and 9 by 12.
Yeah.
And I really haven't shown small works this way. But when Andy and Liz from Tibor came to the studio this past summer, they had the idea, because I was like, oh, well, I've got this pile of small stuff and I've got this. And they were like, they thought they had the idea to make the show of the 3 different sort of bodies of work that I think work together as these small 3 worlds kind of. So I really appreciated that. And it's really interesting for me to see this work this way.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like the separation of the different groups and how they all feed into your work and your work as a painter.
Yeah.
And having this, so remind me again which year this ability to collage and shrink down into your paintings entered your practice.
It started, I think, in like 2017.
Okay.
Yeah.
So since then, and having now the stockpile of works on paper to build a world from, is this something that you keep in mind?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And I also I think it's making me in some ways I'm even more eager to make small works while I'm making the paintings at the same time, to just keep the library growing, the library of images.
Right.
And also like I specifically will like there's a painting in my studio where I'm outside at night looking at a scene in my neighborhood, but the figure is only like 4 inches tall, but I painted it on like, maybe 20 inches tall, on a piece of paper, so I could then shrink it down specifically for that purpose.
Yeah. And so you mentioned that when you were in Ireland, your colors were perhaps different than when you would be in your home studio in Philadelphia. Could you elaborate a bit more about how being in different places changes your outlook to the kind of paintings that you might be making?
Well, obviously in Ireland, you can't get away from the green, and it's Green can be difficult sometimes, but I was determined, and then I end up even painting my studio floor green. To me, when I look at concrete, not this concrete floor, but concrete often looks kind of green to me. So I like that, that I had to come up with a lot of different greens, because there are a lot of different greens in the natural landscape. But then you get a break from it when you paint the lake or the night sky.
Right. These are more natural elements from nature.
Yeah. I mean, you can't say I'm, like my color is very keyed up. It's very keyed up and intense, but I think of it, to me, it's like how I see things.
Right.
In Philadelphia, I'm constantly painting brick, red brick. I love brick, and there's tons of it. And the reds can be all over the place, but to me, they're all red brick.
Right. And so, so being in Philadelphia, surrounded by these red brick facades that enter into your psyche and your environment, do you seek out to break from that once in a while? Is this something that you look for in order to have a different environment from which to be in?
That's an interesting question. It's not the only thing I see. In my studio, I have brick walls, some of which are painted white and some of which are sort of the crumbly gray. They were whitewashed at one point. But in my paintings, the brick can takes on different colors. I don't stay true to that fact. So I will play with it, or even things like when I'm making studio paintings, depending what time of day I'm describing for that particular image, I could make the walls very red or make the walls very blue, or and the ceiling, so it's not naturalistic in that way. In those cases, it's more about a mood or a time of day. Without sort of using shadows and stuff, I prefer to use color.
Right. Use it as a structure to compose.
Right.
Yeah. And as far as like an artist studio goes, having done many residencies, you must have been in so many different spaces aside from your own, which has stayed the same or changed through renovations. So what do you think about when you first enter these empty spaces?
Yeah, it's interesting because you walk in and they are like empty and clean, and in some ways that's really nice. It's like it's like having a great big panel ready to paint on. But I definitely look at the architecture, and I thought I probably almost right away think about what angle am I going to paint? How am I going to describe this room that I'm now going to be working in for a month or 2 months or whatever it is? So it's definitely a way I get going working in a new place. Is like definitely looking at the studio and how do I feel in it? How am I going to work in it?
Right, becoming familiar.
Exactly.
Yeah. Whereas your own home studio is something perhaps like your cats, you can paint from memory.
Right.
You know it so well.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think that we could perhaps have some concluding remarks. I've enjoyed getting to know what you've been thinking about as a process, getting into this, detail and minutia. And of course, what I find, really special is this constant cycle of reflection, self-reflection, and continuing that expansion. It's kind of a cycle that keeps growing, perhaps like a spiral. So thank you for sharing with us, all these insights into your practice as an artist and letting us into the lived experience of the artist.
Well, thank you, Amanda. And I didn't get a chance at the beginning to thank the Brooklyn Rail and Chloe and everyone at the Rail. I'm truly honored to have been asked to do this and to have all these eyes on me and the work. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda and Sarah. That was a really lovely conversation, and I enjoyed hearing more about this show very much. So thank you for your generosity and your responses, Sarah. We do have a few questions, and I encourage folks in the audience who have questions you'd like to add to our Q&A to post them in the chat, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. The first question today is from GE. GE, I'll give you the chance to ask.
Oh, thank you, Chloe, and thank you, Amanda. And Sarah, I love your work. I first saw Wissahickon many years ago and was enchanted by it, which is part of my question here. Can you talk about how the Italian Renaissance artist Stefano di Giovanni, also known as Sassetta, helped you think through the idea of moving through the frame?
Oh, absolutely. And that's such a great question. And I absolutely love that work. And Wissahickon is a perfect example of how I'm riffing on that, because, you know, GE, I'm so honored that you remember that painting. It shows me in the Wissahickon Park in Philadelphia, which is a very wooded section of park, and in the snow, and I'm walking, and you see me 3 times, just like those Italian Renaissance paintings. But my dog Birdie at the time, you see her 6 times, because the way dogs cover a whole lot more territory, you know. And at one point you see her pooping, and then you see me carrying the poop bag. Yeah, I love that work, and it's very important to me. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for that question, GE. The next question is from Kathy Bradford. Kathy, I'm going to give you the chance to ask Sarah if you'd like.
Oh, thanks. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Sarah, this has brought back so many memories, seeing your work and hearing you talk. I remember a talk you gave at Skowhegan. What year was that?
2005.
So I was just getting to know you, and it was a terrific talk. I loved it. And then came the questions at the end. And this really important artist, this famous artist, who was probably a faculty, raised her hand and started talking about your work. And she used the word faux naive. And I was so pissed off. I was outraged that she could say that. So even though I didn't know you very well, I went up to you at the end of the talk and said, "What'd you think of that?" And I'll never forget, you said, "I hated it. I'm not naive. I'm not faux naive." And then I knew I had found a friend, a kindred spirit, because I hate so much being referred to as naive.
Yeah.
You remember that?
I do. And I totally agree with you. And the funny thing was, I think by that time I was kind of over that, because there was a critic in Philadelphia for many years who had given me some really bad reviews, and he like sort of accused me of being faux naive. But eventually, when I had a big show at the ICA in Philadelphia, he actually did this total turnaround and said, "I don't know what took me so long, but I finally get it." And he like gave me this rave review. So some people, it just takes a long time to get over their preconceptions, you know. Thanks, Kathy.
Thanks for that question, Kathy, and thanks for that answer, Sarah. I'm going to ask the last question today. Sarah, I'm curious how you decide to, sometimes I notice your compositions are more anonymous, and then other times they're more place-based. And I was curious, you know, if that's a choice that you're making in the moment, or if there are certain strands of thought that lead you to make the space a little bit more spare behind, you know, your subjects. And then I'm also curious, I mean, you made most of these works around COVID, and, you know, what was the impact of COVID on your practice and on your manner of looking at the world and taking in the beauty in the ordinary?
Yeah. Well, you know, COVID, you know, it hit everybody. It hit some people much harder than others. And, you know, being an artist who just works in my studio on my own, you know, it didn't have a lot of effect on that side of things. Although earlier when I thought back to when I was saying I don't normally paint other people, I did one painting during COVID that shows having a gathering in my yard where everyone's sitting 6 feet apart. And so it's pretty funny that I chose COVID to depict other people, which is sort of funny. Yeah, and I don't know, I guess some paintings just need more information to tell whatever story I'm trying to tell or whatever the moment is. And that's why they might have more in them. And then some are more emptier. Who knows why? It's more of a quiet moment. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for your answer to my question. And thank you to all of you for your questions today. And a huge thank you again to Sarah and to Amanda for this conversation. At the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our community events with a poetry reading. And so it is my great pleasure to welcome Rachel James to the virtual stage. Rachel James is a poet and artist with a background in experimental ethnography. She's the author of an Eros encyclopedia, and her poems have been published by The Recluse and Form 4. She's presented her work in the United States, Canada, and Europe. As an audio documentarian, she's worked with BBC Radio, WNYC, The Organist, and others. She lives in New York City, Lenape-Hoking. And with that, Rachel, if you're online and available, it's over to you for your reading. Rachel, just making sure you're there. I think we're a little early for Rachel, so maybe, I know my colleague Eleanor has a question for you, Sarah, and maybe while I message Rachel, Eleanor will ask you a question.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Chloe. I'm so glad I'm gonna get to ask my question. So thank you for passing the mic over. Sarah and Amanda, thank you for this amazing conversation. It was so lovely. It's such a treat. And I love your work so much, Sarah. I'm wondering, your work is so beautifully intimate, and it really is, as we've discussed, a piece of your life. Do you ever feel hesitation or vulnerability around the very personal nature of your work? Or I guess similarly, how does it feel to have such deeply personal reflections of yourself in a more public space like a gallery or museum?
Yeah, they are personal, and some more so than others. And but they are also, I'm very careful of what I include and what I leave out. But I have, over the years, I have made paintings like I went through cancer treatment, I survived a sexual assault, and I made paintings about those events in my life. And, you know, like, especially the rape paintings were very hard to make, but they were important for me and they were cathartic. And then when I see them, it's like a continuum, and they're all relevant, and they all kind of have their place in the whole life. So it can be a little, it is a little scary, and it's difficult at times, but there's enough, you know, joy and stuff to carry along the difficulties.
Does it feel at the same time empowering as well?
Yes, that's a good word. Yeah, thank you for that.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thanks for that question, Eleanor. I'm glad you had the chance to ask it. And thanks again, everyone, again, for your questions. I've introduced Rachel already, and Rachel's here, and we can't wait for her reading. So Rachel, and now over to you for your poetry reading to close us out.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. I was just making some tea because I have a bit of a cough, but I loved listening in. And yeah, so I sort of feel compelled to just thank all artists and poets right now for continuing to make work. And, you know, hearing such a, just, it's inspiring. And I feel grateful to be in a space with you, Sarah, because it's, you know, such a, it's decades of work that you're sort of offering to us, and that's inspiring for me because it's not easy to keep going. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. There's probably a lot of artists and writers here in the room. And I was moved by the sort of intimacy and generosity of your paintings as well, Sarah, and how in the beginning, I loved how you put it like that you paint the whole room and include more than just a singular subject. And I felt that kind of intimacy so much. So for some poetry, I wanted to take this time, even though it's quite short, but it's still precious because we are all here in this room together, to call into the room the incredible poetic traditions of the people of Palestine. And I've been now in kind of a daily practice of attuning my attention to the Palestinian struggle for liberation. And so I want to start with a poem by Zakaria Muhammad, translated by Lena Tufaha. And then I wanted to end with a short poem of my own. My grandmother came from Eastern Europe to New York, where I am sitting now, in 1910. And along with so many other Jewish people around the turn of the 20th century. And I've been feeling her presence lately, even more than usual. And I think one reason for that is that she was sort of the first person to teach me that no one is free until all are free. So I'm feeling that very much right now. I can link the poem I'm going to start with. I think I can write to everyone or no? Yeah, so that's a link to the poem I'm about to read. And thank you. Yeah, thank you so much again. This is from a book called Kushban, again by Zakaria Muhammad. 1. I caught a glimpse of you as I ran. I had no time to stop and kiss your hand. The world was chasing me down like I was a thief, and it was impossible for me to stop. If I had stopped, I'd have been killed. But I caught a glimpse of you, your hand and a stem of narcissus in a glass of water, your mouth unbuttoned, your hair a soaring bird of prey. I caught a glimpse of you, but I had no matches with me to light a bonfire and dance around it. The world was failing me, abandoning me, and so I didn't even wave at you. One day, the world will settle down. The crazed cable channels will stop broadcasting, and those that hound me will disperse so I can return to that road, the one where I caught a glimpse of you. I'll find you in that same chair, your hand a stem of narcissus, your smile a bird of prey, and your heart an apricot blossom. And there, with you, beneath the shade of your apricot, I'll tear down the tent of my orphanhood and build my home. And to end, I wanted to read a little bit from my book, An Eros Encyclopedia. This is, well, you'll see why, but it's because of my grandmother. Split dew. Is there a warrior march plum hat? My helmet made with flowers, embroidered it sings. My grandmother's Jew on a boat from Germany song. Exactly 30 years before the Holocaust. It doesn't expire. What I am trying to say. Behold, my pricked finger drips into your glass, and I wait. Mothers, ash, fathers, Cheetos wrappers, coals, red, grandmothers, Russia, grandfathers, socialism, wood, aberrations, coal, walking like a deer when the woods are loud, anal sex, itchiness, waking up in the night with an itchy asshole, finding cream you didn't know existed, delicately smearing it on, small tits you see behind your eyelids, the position of death, the body after death and who will wash it, the stomach that was once inside your stomach, the palace in your brother's mouth, the palace in your sister's mouth, the palace in your father's mouth, the palace in your mother's mouth, the palace in your grandfather's mouth, the palace in your grandmother's mouth. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, Rachel. And thank you again to Sarah and to Amanda. And thank you so much to Liz at Tibor Denage, who was so helpful in pulling together materials ahead of today's event. Thank you as well to the Terra Foundation for American Art, who sponsor this NSE program and make daily conversations like this one possible, and for their support of our growing archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. For 23 years, the Brooklyn Rail has been a platform for the arts, for culture, and for politics through our free monthly publication and public events like this one, our daily NSE. You can check the chat for a link to donate to support our work at the Rail. And if you're free on Monday at 1 p.m., join us for a conversation with artist Maleka Magosi and Zoe Hopkins on the occasion of Spaces of Subjection, parts 1 through 5 at Jack Shainman in New York. We'll conclude with a poetry reading by Aristilda Kirby. And as is tradition, you all can now turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so much from me and everyone at the Rail for being here today in this space.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Amanda.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you,
Rachel,
Sarah.
Amanda. Rachel, for your reading.
Thank you for coming, everybody.
Wonderful, thank you.
Fabulous.
Good question.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Rachel.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you so
Thank
much
you,
for the
Sarah.
reading.
Hey, Chris Taylor.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you so
for the
much.
reading. Thank you.
Great.
And go see the show. Would
Hey,
you-
family. Thanks for coming, family. I got a bunch of family on.
Yes.
Hi, Sarah. Hi, Johnny and
Congratulations
Sherry.
on the show, Sarah. Yeah, and
Have a
come
great
please
weekend.
see the show. Please come see the show tomorrow, you guys.